So really, as an overview, they do have a complete line of speakers, paging horns, speakers, all IP enabled, and they are self-amplified. Their paging speakers do feature both internal microphones as well. So with that, they will allow two-way paging. That's everything from their paging horns, like the 8186 that you will see to the left, to their in-ceiling speakers, and even the audio alerters, such as the 8180 in the middle here does feature two-way paging as well. On the intercom side, there is both door video intercoms that feature touch screen to initiate door relays, etc. And there is your traditional push-button IP-enabled intercom that does feature door relays and door strikes as well to trigger events. There is also visual notification units. Those can be found in a wide array of colors that you will see later on in the presentation. Those, of course, are all IP enabled as well. What's unique about Algo, there is no, per se, SIP server required because multicasting is built into their units. The unit or gateway over here, you will notice, is the 8301. There is bell scheduling integrated into that device, as well as you can plug in via the 3.5 millimeter jack music to broadcast over your IP speakers as well. And there's a Polycom phone up here also. So Polycom was the first to integrate actual paging through their devices as well. So you can actually do multicasting through the Polycom phones, and you can utilize Algo that way as well. There is also Algo is the only company where you can tie a SIP alerter directly to the phone utilizing the cable from Algo that can act as an external ringer. So if you're in a loud environment, you can use the cable in the 8180 for a Polycom phone for an external ringer. Okay. So Algo, there's a lot of change, of course, throughout the industry. Critical safety and security functions, lockdowns, of course, unfortunately, being a necessity now in many schools or public areas. What's great is that Algo has adapted this and now has IP-enabled buttons to enable door strikes or tie into various alerting systems or play pre-recorded messages as well with the push of a button. You can tie that into any of your UC environments such as Sangoma, Cisco, 3CX, and any of the hosted providers will play as well. Any of the BroadSoft utilizers such as Nextiva, of course, Digium, anything asterisk space will work. Okay. Now, different verticals, we do see Algo being used in everything from the educational markets to healthcare, manufacturing, transportation, trucking stations as well, call stations for the weighing stations. We've seen a lot of utilization. Airports as well. I know that Algo is involved in several major large airport installs, and you can certainly utilize all the verticals that are listed here. And it looks like Scott Farrell has joined to take over. So thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, the one, the only, Scott Farrell.
Yeah, so from a vertical perspective, we are in basically all of them. So why don't we just jump ahead to the next slide, Brian, and we'll continue right along. So Brian, you took them through the solution overview slide. So basically, I'm sure I was not part of that conversation, but I'll just touch on a few things quickly, right? So all of our endpoints are IP, endpoints that are basically running a Linux operating system with a SIP stack. So they basically connect to the network, and then they get manipulated either by the UC environment. You can have triggers that we're going to be talking about today that can be wired triggers, that could be multicast triggers, and so on and so forth. So it's important to understand that all of our IP endpoints that we manufacture are self-amplified, connected to the network. We have no common equipment or desktop software running or any server requirements. So the speakers that we manufacture on the screen now, and they're used for paging and loud ringing. The fact that they are IP endpoints and they support multicast, we can scale into the hundreds of speakers on a LAN segment. The fact that they're IP endpoints allows us to supervise them. So in a legacy infrastructure where you would have 70-volt systems in a legacy infrastructure, if somebody basically disconnected a speaker, you would not be aware of that. If somebody were to have to make a change to a 70-volt infrastructure and make a speaker louder, they typically would have to go up and re-tap the speaker. With this technology, there's a web interface that you can log into and make changes dynamically on any of the endpoints. Another important feature that we support is wideband, which is the G722 codec for HD voice. I talk a little more about that with regards to a slide because it's becoming quite important for speech intelligibility, when you're addressing people in different situations, especially emergency situations. All of the endpoints are PoE 802.3AF, so they're PoE devices. And one of the really important features that we have within our endpoints is the ambient noise capability. So all of our speakers have an embedded microphone. A lot of people think that the microphone was there for two-way talkback, which it does facilitate. We can do a half-duplex conversation with the speakers, and it works very, very well. But the intention of the microphone originally was for ambient noise detection. So instead of tapping a speaker for your worst-case scenario, take an example of a classroom where there might be a teacher sitting in there alone before the students arrive. If the speaker was tapped in a legacy environment to address the worst case scenario, it could be quite loud and uncomfortable for the teacher. So with our endpoints, the Algo endpoints, you would set these to a nominal volume that's acceptable for that single person in the room. And then you enable the ambient noise feature within our devices, and we'll sense the ambient noise in the environment, and then we'll self-amplify. So when 30 students come into the classroom and the noise level increases, the speaker will dynamically address that increase in noise. The endpoints have audio memory for WAV files, so all of the speakers that you're looking at right now have a gig of memory available for uploading customized WAV files. You'll see when we speak about this Algo 8301 paging adapter, it too has a gig of memory, and I'm going to be talking about that quite a bit, but it is becoming more or less the multicast master of the environment as they're getting more complex and large. As I said, there's a web interface for management, and we support the necessary encryption protocols to encrypt the communications with our devices. So we're continuing to make improvements. So what we're doing is we're going to be introducing PoE Plus on some of our speakers. So the 8186 horn speaker, it's very popular in industrial environments. It's an IP66 rated device that can be installed outside, so quite popular manufacturing, schools. And you'll find in large manufacturing, when you're doing large deployments of horn speakers, the design typically will have speakers back to back. So what we're going to do is we're going to build a PoE Plus version of the 8186. which will, standalone will be louder, but there'll be an analog speaker that will be optional, and you will be able to attach it to the PoE Plus speaker. So it'll reduce the number of drops. Today, if you had 2 speakers back to back, you'd have to have 2 drops run to that location. With the PoE Plus version, you'd be able to have 1 drop, power the PoE Plus speaker, and then optionally power another analog speaker, horn speaker that would look identical to it. It just doesn't have the network infrastructure in it. With the 8188 ceiling speaker down at the bottom of the slide and the 8189 surface speaker to the right of the slide, we're coming out with a PoE Plus version of those as well, and we're going to allow you to run 3 supervised satellite speakers off of that. So that, in different environments where, again, you're not going to have to run as many drops, and if you're going to have, maybe a certain zone where you, want to deploy and extend, you'll easily be able to just tap off of that PoE Plus speaker and drop in more cost-effective, cheaper speakers to do that. So this is a new speaker that we've come out with. It's for the education vertical originally, but it can be used in any room where you want, a high visibility digital clock and a speaker, among other features. So this speaker clock combination has all of the feature parity of the speakers that I already spoke of, but it includes a high visibility digital clock with white on black contrast. It basically has, the numerics on it are, 30 millimeters or 2.3 inches tall, so they're actually quite substantive and well seen. In this unit, we've actually built in door control. We're getting a lot of requests in different verticals, especially in the education vertical, where they maybe will want to be able to trigger a multicast event or a ring event, and then basically have us lock a door strike, for instance, in a classroom. The other thing with this speaker, there's 2 versions. There's the 8190 and the 8190F. The 8190F is the one that we're looking at, and that has the strobe option. So on the side of the speakers, there's red-green programmable LED strobes, and you can get the speaker without the strobes or with the strobes. And basically, RGB means that you're going to be able to program different colors. So you can, and different patterns, right? So if, in a school, if you were to go into a shelter in place, you may flash amber. If you go into a lockdown, you'll flash red. And if you go, for instance, to all clear, you can flash green, and then you can trigger, of course, the flash patterns, the colors, and audible messages that can be stored within the environment and played out via multicast to those speakers. It is a PoE 802.3 AT, so it's PoE Plus. It's got a little more horsepower required to run this unit. You'll notice that I've got a bullet there for 4-speaker line array. So what we've done is this speaker is intended to be surface mounted on the wall, and what we do with having a line array in there, we're able to direct the sound, so we can push the sound out, horizontally, rather than a regular speaker that would push sound out in a cone. We can push it horizontally across the room. And the reason we did that is so that we can aim the sound, and a person that would be sitting fairly close to the speaker and someone that might be sitting on the other side of the classroom are going to have a very similar experience when there's sound coming out of that speaker. We've deployed 700 of these, and that's how the speaker came about. We did a project with a partner that was working with the school board, and they went all IP, so they put in 3,400 endpoints, and they had 700 classrooms. And the feedback has been phenomenal from them with regards to the quality of the sound and feedback from the principals, teachers, and students. This, of course, has the ambient noise capabilities in it as well. It has an embedded microphone as well to facilitate that, and two-way communication. So there's an integrated backlit button within the speaker that you can push, and that button can trigger a ring event, so it could call an admin group, and then it'll set up a two-way communication path, or it could trigger a page event. There's also relay inputs on this device, so you could have, optionally, you could have another button that would be run off this separately and could be wired to a different part of the environment. So if you wanted to have a hidden button, for instance, under a desk, you could have that as well, and then that could trigger another event. So here's the kind of the discussion about G722 wideband. So when you are in G722 HD voice, you're taking a much broader sampling, so you're up to 7,000 hertz. And that is, for instance, that enhances speech intelligibility. In narrowband G711, syllables can kind of blur over. So you can be in certain environments where you will kind of think, what did they say, or you can misinterpret what they say. It's a much more intelligible experience when you're using G722. The handsets that you're deploying in many of your environments today, Polycom, Yealink, they all support G722 wideband codec. It's quantifiable, it's measurable, and it's becoming more and more part of the regulatory requirements, and we're seeing it more as a requirement in RFP. So here's what we're doing with our devices, right? So we're going to talk a lot about these modules, the Algo 8301. So the IP-enabled picture on the left, basically you may have had a digital system in the past and you were connected to an amplifier, and in many cases you would have been directly connected to your key system or your PBX. What we have done is we allow you to preserve that asset when you go into a UC environment. So our adapter provides a balance line output to your existing amplifier, and it allows you to SIP register it into your UC infrastructure. So then you can call that Algo 8301, it will answer, and your voice will be pushed out over to that existing amplifier. So you get to preserve it. A lot of clients that are in the middle, I have IP speakers only. I have many clients that, and I think, Brian, you covered the industry influencer slide, but there are a lot of customers that are getting to common infrastructure requirements. They only want to have RJ45 and they only want to have network. So I do see people doing a lot of forklifting and going all IP, or even new builds where, they're just speccing all IP. So basically, in the IP world, the speakers connect to the network, and then they can register, or they can be manipulated with multicast. And you'll see more of that in the use case slides that we're going to touch on later. And then the hybrid model. So the hybrid model, what that does is it allows you to basically have a combination of the both, right? So you can have the 8301 paging adapter driving a legacy 70-volt system, but because we support multicast with our devices, you can augment the environment with other IP speakers, and then we can basically bring all that together. And I have some more slides that will further explain and show the benefits of that, leveraging multicast. If you're going to go ahead and advance that one. So this is a snapshot of the two paging adapters that we build. So the 8301 paging adapter, basically 1-to-1 ratio to an amplifier. But there's a lot of embedded benefits within the 8301 paging adapter. You'll notice that there's an auxiliary in port on it. So you can plug a 3.5 millimeter jack in there. So meaning you can take a music source, you could plug it into the 8301, and then you'd be able to broadcast that music source over your existing amplifier and over your multicast network. So you're going to be able to broadcast it to IP endpoints as well. There is a series of relays, as you see on this, so we can basically provide the capability of connecting a button to trigger an event. And there's other embedded features within this device. It has a calendaring application, which is very popular for if you have an industry where you're doing shift change or in education for bell scheduling. We can upload any number of combination of wave files to this device because, as I mentioned, it has a gig of memory. So basically, very, very used in many emergency situations for evacuation and lockdown. And these can all be triggered by with ring events, and you'll see that later in the use case slide. So the 8301, I'm seeing that more and more as the kind of the multicast master device that gets put into a lot of these different solutions that I work with in multiple verticals. The 8373 zone paging adapter. So in legacy infrastructure, you may have had a physical zone controller that was connected to your amplifier. We basically use the 8373 we just preserve the amplifier. We want the power from that amp. We take the power into our device, and we do the switching within our device. So what we would do is then from your zone controller, your legacy zone controller, where you would have had basically wires going out to lines of speakers, we tie all that into the 8373. Even if you had 9 zones or 10 zones, I don't care, because I can put multiple 8373s, 8301s into the mix, and I can basically tie all of that together with multicast. What I'll get you to do, Brian, is I think jump ahead 2 slides so that I can just talk a little more about mixing and matching. So here's an example. I'm working with an airport right now. They have 154 amplifiers in their environment. what they've done for phase one is they've put in the 8301 paging adapters and in 8373s were required and interfaced that to all of their existing infrastructure. And then they've tied that back into their UC infrastructure, their VoIP. They've also, are renovating the airport. So they're augmenting, basically the environment by adding IP speakers. And their end state, because they have over 3,000 speakers that are 70-volt analog speakers that they had issues with, they can't monitor them. They don't know when they're not working unless people tell them, and it's imperative that they have their paging working properly all the time. So what their end state will be is to be all IP. So what they're doing is today they can make a SIP call, and you can see the 8301 is terminating that call in the middle. And basically, I can then do a broadcast to all of those amplifiers and speakers. If desired, I can basically have the 8301 answer, play a wave file, and say, for zone 1, press 1, and they can hit amplifier 1. Zone 2, I can hit amplifier 2, and so on. So there's multiple ways of, terminating a call and activating paging. You're going to see in the slides where there's, with multicast, we don't need any SIP registration whatsoever to be able to do paging, and I have some slides that do touch on that. What I'll get you to do, Brian, is go back one slide, because I just want to touch on some important parts of multicast and the difference. So in the slide that you're looking at right now, the above portion of the slide depicts a retail customer that we were working with. So they would have had all those boxes represent different feature sets that were part of their legacy paging infrastructure, and they tied it into their UC infrastructure with an analog terminal adapter, an ATA. So the ATA does not support HD, so it doesn't do that G722 codec, nor is it capable of multicasting. So what you'll be able to do is call the ATA and do a page out over that legacy system. But I have a phone down at the bottom with a red X beside it. The sound isn't going to come out over the phone. It's not. It's going to only hit the old amplifier. It's not, because the ATA cannot multicast. If you look at the picture below, where we've put in the Algo 8301 paging adapter, I provide a balanced line output to that amplifier, and all of those boxes have disappeared because all of those feature sets and more are embedded within my device. And then, as you can see, there's a green check mark beside the phone, and there's also an IP speaker in the picture because I can multicast and I can broadcast to all of the devices at once. So that's a pretty good slide, I find, for kind of visualizing the benefits of multicasting in your endpoint. So the SIP LED strobe lights, so we make an 8128 SIP LED strobe light today. It's a PoE endpoint for visual alerting and notification for ring or page. And again, it's multicast scalable, and it's very popular to indicate, loud ringing, emergency procedures, for instance, lockdown. I have many school customers, that they have strobe lights that are strategically placed throughout the school, and those strobe lights only go off if it's an emergency page or a lockdown. Kids just don't listen to pages typically, nor do staff sometimes. So when they see that strobe lights are flashing and there's a page, they know it's an emergency situation, and they have to stop and listen. So I was talking about red-green programmable strobe lights on the new 8190 classroom speaker, clock speaker that I showed earlier. So with the 8128 that I just showed that had the multiple lens covers, we're going to continue to manufacture that. We're upgrading the processor in it. We're upgrading the processor in all of our products so we can have a common stream of firmware available for all the products. We don't want to have to manage different streams. So everything is getting upgraded processors. So as we do that, there's more functionality and more power available to the units. So the 8128 that you're using today with the multiple lens covers, you're still going to be able to buy that white LED with the lens covers. But we're also coming out with the 8138. I'm actually shipping beta units of those next week to some of our clients that are going to do some testing for us. So the 8138 is going to have red, green, blue LEDs. You're going to be able to trigger different color events and so on and so forth with multicast events or ring events with that device. So multicast for scalability. So a lot of people get confused. They think all the speakers, when you're in an IP environment with IP speakers, need to be registered back to the UC infrastructure, and that's not the case whatsoever. So basically, in this picture, the speaker down at the bottom where the SIP call is terminating, yes, it's going to be registered to your UC infrastructure to receive that call. But as you speak and the RTP packets are passed, they get pushed onto the network. You could have another 100 speakers out on the network, and they'll play that same RTP stream, but they have no knowledge whatsoever of the SIP server. They're just sitting on the network, and they're just listening for messages coming from the master that they're subscribed to listen to. You can go to the next slide, please. So I think I mentioned already loud ringing. So you can pair any one of our devices, so the 8180 or 8186. So any of the speakers can be paired with a device to be put into a ring group, and then of course you can use multicast if you want to have that ring broadcast on many speakers or just locally on one speaker. You can design that in any way you'd like. If you go to the next slide, Brian, I'm showing basically the fact that you're able to do the same thing with visual alerting. So you could basically put an Algo 8128 into a ring group, and then when the phone rings, the strobe light will flash. Again, it supports multicast, so if you wanted to flash multiple units or have it flash and ring audibly on speakers, you can do that as well, okay? So what I want to show here is, so Polycom were one of the first ones to kind of the hosted, UC built, the IP sets that had some pretty great features in them, and one of them was Polycom Group Page. So in legacy infrastructure, when you're paging on an IP office or a Northstar or CS1000, you would have page groups. You would be limited, in what you would be able to do with the number of phones that could participate in a group. With the Polycom Group Page feature, they developed a way to be able to multicast a page to all of their endpoints. So we basically embedded that in our endpoints at their request, and they can basically we can do a page. So in this depiction here, the set is doing a Polycom Group Page. It's hitting all, the legacy amplifier, my speakers, other phone. There is no SIP registration whatsoever in this picture. It's completely being done independently of a SIP server. So, it's basically the same slide. Now all the others that are out there now are making phones, right? So that support RTP multicast. Not even, they don't have, Polycom Group Page is kind of specifically driven their way. So basically in this picture, the new phones from Yealink Audio Codes, Cisco's just come out with an 8800 series phone for 3PP for hosted environments. It supports RTP multicast. Mitel's coming out, or it has out the 6800 series SIP phone that supports multicast. So there's a multitude of different phone manufacturers now that support RTP multicast. So you can basically build out a paging environment without being SIP registered. I'll give you an example. We're doing a school board, I think I mentioned, where they're putting in the 700 clock speakers. They have ShoreTel as their UC infrastructure, and their concern was, what if one of the school ShoreTel units goes down? What are we going to do about paging, right? Because a lot of it was tied into the ShoreTel. So what we've done as a backup measure is in the design, the Yealink phone was selected by the customer, and there's a Yealink phone sitting in every one of their offices at the school. So in the event of the ShoreTel system going down, they can still pick up the Yealink phone and page the different zones within their school. This slide just depicts the fact that we are building blocks, and you're going to manipulate us. So, the Algo endpoints, so the clock represents an NTP server. So for the calendaring application that I spoke of on the Algo 8301, it can sync to an NTP server. So you never have to worry about time. It's always going to be synchronized. And then you can use time to trigger events, right? So those could be bell tones for school. They could be shift changes, scheduled announcements in a hospital, whisper page that visiting hours are over, and so on and so forth. So there's lots of different applications for the calendaring event. You can trigger, with a SIP call, you can trigger an event with a supervised single wire, two-wire, single pair connection. All of our speakers and the 8301 have a relay input, relay output. So you're capable of connecting buttons to these, and those buttons then can trigger an event, whether it be a call or a multicast page. And again, we use multicast extensively to be able to broadcast events out onto the network. So yeah, it just depicts the fact that leveraging multicast, your UC infrastructure and physical inputs and time, you can address many different workflows that you'll come across. I'm just showing just a brief shot. So the nice thing about these endpoints is they all, as I mentioned, have a web interface to manage them. So as an end user, you're going to be in control of your environment. You're going to be able to log in and make changes to any of these devices. And then it's a simple connection to the back of the speaker with a terminal screw and a 2-wire connection to the device that you want to have control in that speaker, and then you can program what it's going to do within the web interface. So very, very simple to use, very simple to configure, very simple to assemble the solution. Yeah, ambient noise. So I mentioned ambient noise in the overview of the speaker. So this just depicts the fact that, in that picture above where the room is empty, there might be a couple of people sitting there, or might be somebody, a cleaner or custodian in there. And if you have this legacy type environment tapped to address the worst case scenario, it wouldn't necessarily be a great experience. So what we do is we address this by adjusting the nominal value in the quiet environment and then enabling the ambient noise capability so that the microphone will sense dynamically what's going on and then self-amplify to address the worst case scenario. So many customers, they want to have, basically speed dials. They don't necessarily, I gave the example of having the 8301 answer a SIP call and then using DTMF tones to select zones. Some organizations don't want to do it that way. They want to have speed dials. So we can register SIP page extensions into our speakers. So basically, we have 50 that are in there. And that's not a physical limitation. It was just an arbitrary, that's a lot. So 50 page extensions are built into the speakers. So what I'm depicting here, 5 speakers, you could have up to 31 zoning possibilities, and each of them could be mapped to a program dial key. So in this instance, you're seeing the phone is dialing SIP extension 1000. The speaker in the middle is terminating that call. It's broadcasting, and it is also, sending that RTP stream out to some listeners who are going to basically play that RTP stream as well. If you go to the next slide, Brian, I'm going to be dialing a different extension. I'm now going to be dialing SIP extension 1001. The same speaker is going to answer, although it's not going to broadcast locally, but it will send the RTP stream out to all of the listeners that are subscribed to that. So basically, you can manipulate this and do all kinds of different zoning. What I want to highlight, though, and this is where there seems to be a lot of confusion when people get into multicasting and IP paging and registrations. So in this instance, I had SIP extension 1000 and SIP extension 1001, both registered and terminated on that speaker. You would typically require a license to do that in your UC infrastructure. So if you were registering into, you're registering as a third-party SIP endpoint. So that would have accounted for 2 registrations right there. Typically, in these types of environments, anytime you want to call a device and have it ring, or call the device and have it terminate the call for a page, or terminate the call for 2-way, you're going to typically need a license to do that. So Algo manufactures 4 intercom units. We build 2 that are audio only. There's one that's a single piece and one that's a double piece. We'll talk more about that. We build 2 that are capable of video and audio. So the 8201 is the first one I'll speak of, and if you can just advance the slide, Brian, I'll get into a bit more detail about that unit. So the 8201 it's a PoE intercom. So it has an RJ45 connection right on the back of it. It can be surface mount or flush mount in a dual gang. It has door sensor input, so it can be, if somebody were to leave a door ajar, it can alarm to that, basically play a tone over the speakers that the door is ajar. This unit has the door control relay outputs built right into it, so your normally open, normally closed capabilities. So it's a very compact unit. For those of you that are familiar with Norstar or the Business Communication Manager by Nortel Networks, Algo was an OEM manufacturer, so we actually built the Norstar, which was a digital door device, door phone, and it looked identical to this, basically from an actual door station perspective. So we built they sold hundreds of thousands of them, so we built a SIP version that is, can basically take the place of a legacy digital infrastructure. So RJ45 to that unit, and then you basically would log into the interface, SIP register it into your environment, and then program a target for it to ring to. Somebody would push that ring, the blue button, and then it would ring that target group. It would establish a call, and then the administrator could then press a button on their phone, digit 6, and release the door. I'm going to talk about the 8028. So I'm sorry. This is something I just wanted to point out. If you order parts, to implement a solution, most network people get this stuff right out of the get-go. So we have a quick install guide that's inserted with every box that you buy. So any speaker, any intercom unit, there is going to be a quick, install, get started guide in there. It's going to be 2 or 3 pages long, and you will be able to get that device up and running that quickly. If you wanted to get into more advanced feature sets, yes, you're going to have to dig up the manual and maybe look into some things. But to get something out of the box up and running, most people can have this up and running, registered to their UC environment within 5 minutes. So I just wanted to show you that's the format that's typically included with all of our devices. We're going to see the 8028 SIP door phone. So what we've done here, as I mentioned, in the digital world, you could have a digital phone, up to 1,000 feet away easily from a PBX or a key system. In the VoIP realm, you're limited to 300 feet. So what we've done here is we've built a 2-piece model. It's called the 8028, and then the door control unit sits within your network realm. It plugs into your network. You'll notice that there's a power on this unit, and the reason, this is the only unit that we have that has power mains, and the reason we do that is because we're allowing you to take a 2-wire connection that you may extend beyond your building perimeter, which means it's going to be outside, so we have to be able to address surges. So that's why there's mains power there. But basically, you can have the call station up to 1,000 feet away from the control box. This control box also has normally open, normally closed capabilities built in it, so that you can control a gate or a door with this device. If you go to the next slide, we're making some updates. That 8028 is our most popular selling device today, and we're upgrading the processor in it, and it's going to introduce more features, encryption capabilities, local link discovery protocol, Cisco discovery protocol, and we'll have a version that's PoE, PoE Plus, or mains power, depending. So if you're not going to be extending it beyond the building, you wouldn't necessarily need to plug it into mains power. You could leverage PoE. So if you go to the next slide, I'm going to be talking about the 8039. So the 8039 is our SIP mullion intercom. It was designed for the fact that many of the new buildings have glass frontages. So we designed this slim factor that it can attach to a mullion. It too is a PoE device. It has web capabilities. So it has a 180-degree H.264 video camera. That allows you to basically see somebody else leaning up against the wall. You'd be able to see them. You'd be able to see a package placed at the foot of the door. It's definitely a wide view lens. And H.264, so if you have a device that has that capability, a phone to support that H.264 video stream, then when they answer the phone, they would be able to bring up the video and see the video on their phone. If you didn't want to make the investment for H.264 video devices, we support web video as well. So that means you just put the IP address in of the device, and you'll be able to see the video on your web browser. So many people will just answer their phone, and if they don't want to see who's there, they'll click on their bookmark in their web browser and bring up the video. I see a lot of schools where they've got video intercom units will basically dedicate a PC in a common area, put up a big monitor on the wall, and then the video is always there, so then everyone in the office can kind of glance over and see who's there. And then these units can accept an inbound call too. So if you see somebody mulling around that's not necessarily, approaching the door, or you don't know what they're doing out there, you can actually call the device and ask them what's going on. The device has an embedded attendant, so what that means is when somebody walks up to the unit and presses the call button, it can initiate a call immediately, or you could set it up so that it'll play an embedded attendant wave file that says, for the custodians, press 2, for admin, press 1, principal, press 3. You can configure it to do whatever you like. The other nice feature in this device is it has the capability of having door access codes programmed into it. So you could log into the web interface and you can program up to 50. So if you were in a school and you were leasing out your gym in the evening for floor hockey or basketball, somebody could show up and have a code, star 9912 or something, and then that would release the door. And then after that event is done, then you can log into that device and wipe that code. So that's the 8039 SIP mullion intercom. And then the last intercom we have is on the next slide, and it's the Algo 8036 multimedia intercom. It's a customized graphic touch display. So as you can see, I've got the 3 units displayed there. On the left is, it's a school representation. Somebody walking up, there's a directory. You call the office. You've got a picture of the school in the back. In the middle, it's an unattended lobby. Touch the screen, it brings up a directory. In healthcare, it could be used to find a patient. So the device is intended to be fully customized with multiple pages. Okay. So you can interact with the unit. It's a full touch display, and you can embed buttons right into the display. Remote door releasing. So basically, again, this device, you can use it to open a door, but the normally open and normally closed controls are not embedded in this device. As I mentioned in the other ones, they were. This one is paired with what we call our IP8061 relay controller, and basically what happens is, this is a SIP PoE device. It gets mounted outside. It's a weatherproof device. Somebody, presses the button. It'll be SIP registered. It'll make a call to the target, and then when the target answers, if they're H.264 compatible, it'll show up on their phone. If not, they can use web video, to view it on a web browser. And then when they press the digit to release the door, that digit is actually being sent over the network to our IP8061 relay controller, which then will activate the relay to the door. Excuse me. The reason we do that, and from a security perspective, it depends how security conscious you are, but in that case, the relay for the door is locked away inside your premises. In the other 2 units, the 8039 and the 8201, I talked about the relay capabilities being built into them. Then they are outside. So if somebody took a sledgehammer and smashed the 8039 off the wall, they could actually short out the wire in there, and it would release the door. So the 8061 relay gets paired with this unit. It also, optionally, if you do have security concerns, can be paired with the 8039 or the 8201. The 8028 is not impacted because its controller already is a 2-piece solution. So that is an overview, basically, of the portfolio. I think what we'll do now is we'll touch on some use cases. So if you can go to the use case slides, that's great. So scheduled announcements. You'll notice that the 8301, as I said, it's becoming the kind of the centerpiece of a lot of the work that I do in multiple verticals, because you typically want to know where your multicast master is. And if you could make a speaker a multicast master, but if you forgot what speaker it was and it went out of service, that could be a bit of a problem. So the 8301 I recommend as a device that gets put into a secure area where people know where it is. It has a calendaring application, which is very popular with the education vertical, in manufacturing, healthcare, because basically an administrator that was working with a legacy system where they were doing a bell schedule and trying to use pound star 555, it can be very, very cumbersome, or it'd be an RS-232 connection to some software that ran on a computer that was 30 years old. It was very cumbersome for them. So when they were able to log into a device over the network, bring up a calendar, go over and click on schedules, build out a schedule, then they can go upload whatever WAV files they want, pick the zones that it's going to be playing in, and then save it, they're done. It's that easy. So we get a lot of positive feedback on the ease of use of that calendaring application. And again, there's a gig of memory here, so you've got a lot of content that you can load on this device or any of our speakers for that matter. So I mentioned, the fact that there's licensing required when you want to be able to, trigger an event with a call event. So in this case, the 8301 has 10 ring extensions available in it for basically emergency notification. So what happens is you call a certain extension, it's going to trigger a WAV file, perhaps, and then it'll basically then, broadcast that out onto the network and trigger strobe lights. So you can build out, kind of how this is going to happen. So you call extension 900 that they show in the example here. This is going to go off and do whatever you've told it to do, and basically it'll continue to play until you call to cancel that. So, you don't want to have somebody be able to go and lock, if you're in lockdown and you've triggered a lockdown, have them be able to go over and hang up a phone set or go push a button again and just shut it off. This, you need to know the code to be able to dial back in to shut the event off. So again, interesting feature sets that are embedded within the 8301. So there's no licensing associated with this. When you buy the device, all of this content is loaded on the device and available for your use. So emergency notification by a push button. So I basically, talked about the fact that we make supervised buttons so that they can be, tied into a device, and when it's triggered, it can basically set off a workflow, and that could be, a multicast event. It could be a call to a target. It could be set up a two-way audio path. Basically we were working with a hospital where we were converting them over to SIP, and I remember the nurse telling me, we were doing some profile studies and talking to many, many different groups within the hospital, and they were saying that the nurse used to take the handset of the phone and stretch it over to the surgeon so he could talk to a control room. I mean, all they did now is they have a 1202 call button that's in the operating theater, and the nurse just hits that, and the speaker that's overhead goes off hook, and it dials the control room, and they have a full communication path open that they can talk hands-free. So there's all kinds of different workflows that you can address with these building blocks that that I'm showing you. So we also have the relay input, right? So you have devices, AEDs are becoming very, very popular. Defibrillators are everywhere, public buildings, schools. So you can have, a scenario where somebody opens up the AED and it'll alarm locally, but it also will send out a relay. So we can take that relay input, and then again, we can trigger, a multicast event or a call to target, so that we can basically broadcast over the network that the AED in hallway XYZ was just taken out, so then emergency personnel can respond to that event. And I think if you go to the next slide, that's the end, I think.